Within the kingdom of Exiled, in the Kreuzer territory, an elderly woman searched the area for Ray. After asking a random man who said he hadn't seen him today, a heavyset woman said she had seen him earlier talking with the children. Then she handed the old lady something to give Ray as a small thank you for his help. She keeps asking the children, who say Ray told them he was going to play with the seagulls and was probably at the lighthouse, and she looks exhausted as she continues searching for him. Meanwhile, Ray appears calm. At the top of the lighthouse, he was enjoying feeding many seagulls. Dine watches him and sees that they adore him. Ray replied, asking if she was enjoying it too, since they were by the sea and surrounded by water. Dine heard someone call Ray. Looking down, Dine saw the old woman who had been searching for him. An old woman is calling him back, saying the Lord is calling, and Ray replied that he would head back right away. Without hesitating, he jumped from the lighthouse and called for Sylphie. Suddenly the spirit appears and eagerly asks Ray to play. The spirit tapped into his power so Ray could glide through the air and land safely on the ground. Sylphie asks him once more to play, but Ray declines and apologizes because his father is calling, and he promises the spirit he will come back later. The old lady comments that Ray hadn't changed. Coming up to Ray, she said she understood the spirits loved him deeply, but when he starts at the academy, he must not show that power so openly around others, and Ray smiled and understood her. He knew that if word got out it would cause trouble, because being blessed by the wind spirit and favored by the water spirits was so rare. The Croyd's territory is governed by a Viscount House of the Kingdom of Exiled. It grew into the kingdom's only maritime trade hub and holds the only hereditary office of Admiral of the Navy. A Viscount normally would not hold that level of power, but the family's generations of spirit blessings explain it. Excessive power draws attention, as it did for the previous head of the house, and Ray is better off appearing to be just an ordinary person with a spirit blessing. Not out of ill will toward the kingdom, but because fewer seeds of conflict are better. It's not a spirit's favor, because to him Dine and Sylphie are just good friends. Before he met his father, the old woman told him they should tidy his hair because it had bird bath water on it. When he got to their house, he went straight to his father's room and knocked, and his father heard him and told him to come in. His father, Kane Cruiser, was Viscount of the Cruiser. Kane asks when he will leave the royal capital since the academy ceremony is coming up soon. Ray replies he will leave the day after tomorrow and plans to go alone. Kane backed him because he was sure Ray would be fine. Kane also said he traveled alone when he enrolled at the academy. Renesia accompanies him on the return, so they travel by carriage. Kane laughs and teases him, saying that if he meets someone nice, he can bring her back with him. The son makes it clear he is going to the academy to study, not to look for a bride. More importantly, didn't he want to talk about something? Kane agreed, saying Ray would pass through the Duke of Norfick's territory on his way to the capital, and he had several Navy documents he wanted to deliver to His Grace, the Duke. Ray understood and asked whether it would be better to deliver those documents in person. His father agreed, but the Duke is very busy and may not be home, so the items could be handed to the Duchess instead. His father also gave Ray a letter he had written. Ray asked his father if something was wrong. Kane laughed and said no, and explained he only wanted to be sure he wouldn't be disrespectful. Though confused, Ray understood him. On the day he left, his father told him to be careful on his journey. His younger sister asked him to tell them about life at the academy when he returned, and his younger brother, with teary eyes, asks him to come back soon. Their mother comforted the boy as Ray left, and the boy had to see Ray off with a smile. Ray knelt on the ground and told his brother Kevin that while Ray was away in the capital, he was counting on Kevin to protect Raisha and their mother. Kevin stopped crying and vowed to protect their mother and older sister, but Raisha disagreed because he could not take Ray's place. Ray told his sister to behave more like a proper lady, saying she won't find a good match if she continues like that. Raisha gave him a look, but she winked and said she might not look like it, but she knows how to put on a good face. She told her brother to do his best and find someone wonderful like their mother. Ray seemed confused about the person his sister mentioned. He asked her what she thought of the academy. To their surprise, their mother told him it's not every day he gets the chance to be around girls his age, and since he's their son, they are sure he'll be super popular at the academy. His mother grew serious and said if he ever wants to find his destined one, he should follow the spirit's guidance, because that is how she met Kane, and Ray agrees, promising he will. He mounted his horse, waved goodbye to his family, and before he left, Riza told him to send them a letter once he arrived at the academy. Kevin told his big brother to travel safely. He then drove off. On his way, he passed a carriage where a boy waved at him, and he smiled back to acknowledge it while Dine and Sylphie walked with him. Sylphie is clearly enjoying riding the horse as they continue their journey. They enter non-folk territory. Dine asks whether Ray will be staying in that town for the night. Ray says he will stay until the 23rd because he has an errand from his father. Before visiting, he needed to freshen up, so he had to find an inn. Sylphie felt puzzled because his master always looked polished and calm. The master thanked his two spirit companions for making things much easier. To an ordinary observer, he would not seem like someone on a long journey. Expecting a meeting with a noble, he decided to be extra careful. Later, neatly dressed, Ray goes to the non-folk's house. A butler leads him into the living room. She waits for Kara von non-folk to arrive and introduce herself, then apologizes to Ray, explaining her husband is working in the royal capital and she will be entertaining Ray in his place. Ray thanked the woman and introduced himself. After that, he gave the documents his father had asked him to prepare. Over a cup of tea, Kara began the conversation by saying she had heard he was on a journey. Ray agreed, saying he was on his way to the royal capital and had enrolled in the Royal Academy this spring. Kara was happy to hear that and said her daughter Seli was also going to the academy. Many nobles enroll at the academy, but Lady Seli stands out, already famous as the Duke of Non-Folk's daughter and the fiancée of the first prince, the heir to the throne, making her a likely future queen. From Ray's point of view, Lady Seli is on a totally different level, and even at the academy he doubts he'll get a chance to speak with her. Kara had one request. If he agreed, she wanted Lady Seli to accompany him from their territory to the capital. Ray's eyes went wide with shock. Kara feared her daughter might be a bother to him. Ray stammered that she was not a bother. He opened his mouth, but Kara cut him off and said she would provide a carriage and attendants because she did not want to impose. Hesitation showed on Ray's face. Kara said she heard he was traveling alone, which suggests he has considerable strength and fighting skill because the roads often hold monsters and bandits, and she added that she wants not only to accompany her daughter on the journey, but also to stay with her at the academy and hopes they can become friends. Because of Seliala's position, many people will come to her with hidden agendas and try to undermine her. She had hoped he could offer at least a little support as a friend, but Ray hesitated when he heard this, unsure if someone like him was fit for that role. Kara said his demeanor shows he does not fawn over those in power or try to gain by being close to them, and she believes Ray would treat the lady not as the next queen but simply as herself. Ray felt confused because Kara might have overestimated him since he wasn't like that. He also doubted that Lady Seli, who had only just met him, would consider him a friend. Kara suggests being only a travel companion for conversation during the trip. If the woman dislikes him or he feels uncomfortable, he can refuse. Then she asks whether he sees it as a favor. Ray hesitated, unsure what to say. Then after a few seconds he sighed and agreed to accompany Sally to the capital as a guard, giving Lady Seli time to decide whether he is worthy of being her friend, and Kara was happy to hear it. Ray was shocked when someone suddenly called her daughter, who seemed to be just waiting outside. The door opened and the woman entered, bowing politely. She greeted Ray and introduced herself. Ray rose, returned the courtesy, and said Lady Kara had given him permission to accompany her to the capital, but Selialis looked displeased, said it felt like they were meeting for the first time, and asked him to rephrase his greeting, leaving Ray staring in confusion before his eyes widened. Her face reminded him of someone who looked like a little girl. He immediately asked if she was Seli and glanced at her large breasts. Blushing, she told him not to stare because she felt embarrassed. Ray noticed and turned to Kara, who was laughing. She told him he'd taken a long time to notice and was starting to get a little impatient. It's been 5 years since they last met. At the time they were staying at the cruiser estate for 2 months while she worked, and Ray spent a lot of time with Seli. Because it was a business reception, they were introduced as Carla and Seli. Ray remembered his father teasing him, and he asked Lady Kara whether his father was in it. She said she wouldn't claim he was on it, but the letter they had received earlier said he did not remember them, and she apologized to Ray for reading it but couldn't resist a small prank. Seli interrupted and said she was disappointed he hadn't noticed anything, leaving Ray speechless and unsure what to do, so Lady Kara defended him, saying it was understandable he hadn't noticed her since they met at a business party, while Seli had been playing along and had used a magic tool to change her hair color back then. Sally remained upset that a childhood friend he had spent 2 months with had been forgotten. Ray felt embarrassed, said Sally had become very beautiful since then, bowed, and apologized deeply for not recognizing her sooner. Sally grew more irritated by his behavior because he spoke too formally. She insists he call her Sally since they are friends. Ray was about to speak, but Seli cut him off. Ray asked Lady Kara for help. Seli felt a little happy when she heard she had become prettier. Lady Kara later told Ray he had lost because when her daughter is like that she won't back down, acknowledged Ray's caution since Celia was already engaged, and asked him to treat Celia as a friend in informal settings. Ray couldn't speak, but he understood every word. He turned to Seli and extended his hand, saying he was counting on her for their journey to the capital. Sally studies his hand and remembers when they were young. At the time, Ray told her that because they were friends, he wanted to protect her. Even when she was young, she appreciated it, but refused to be someone who only ever got protected. As his friend, she wanted to stand beside him as an equal. Ray might think she was reckless, but that's how she wants it. As a girl, she was surprised when Ray tickled her face with a leaf and said he wouldn't deny the reckless part. Smiling at her, he said that's what he loves about her. Ray may have forgotten those words, but she treasured those memories at the time. Ray saw Seli lost in thought, so he called her name and asked if something was wrong, and she smiled and said there was nothing wrong, though in her mind she was the fiancée of the next king while Ray was the heir of a viscount. Their paths will eventually part, but if she has even a little time at his side, she wants to spend it doing the things she loves with him. He owed it to her as a friend, so they left the non-folk state. They set out for the academy, but the carriage stopped in the woods, where Ray dueled a knight. The man lost his grip on his sword and fell to the ground, and Ray pointed his sword at him when someone announced the match was over. Seli and the other guards were surprised by that duel. The knight and Ray shake hands. The knight felt grateful and pleased because Ray had real skill. It was no surprise that Lady Kara trusted him to protect Seli. Ray told the person the pleasure was his because the duel had been a great learning experience. Another knight interrupted, saying Ray had a knack for beating the best swordsmen among them and that his sword style was fascinating, then asked where on earth he had learned it. Ray said he learned that style entirely from his father, the Viscount of the Croiser territory. Both guards were stunned. This is because his father was the naval Admiral Kane Cruiser. No one doubts Ray's strength, but she appears confused. The guard says his father is well known in certain circles, a naval admiral famed for his legendary strength, and the other guards notice he never heard his father's old war stories. Ray hesitated because his father had always said he was a bit of a troublemaker in his youth, but his father wasn't saying that now, and Ray had never taken him seriously back then. At first, some guards said that when they heard Ray was joining the guard detail they complained and doubted their own skills, but after sparring with him, they completely changed their minds. That shows they can trust him to protect the prince without worry. They invite him to spar again sometime, and Ray agreed, saying it was a pleasure. They turn and leave Ray and Seli. Ray said the knights on guard are all very nice people. Seli agreed, but wished they'd stop calling her princess because it's embarrassing for her age. Ray looked at her and said it couldn't be helped since she was a candidate to be the next queen, so she would have to get used to being called that more often, and Seli pows and furrows her brow when Ray also calls her princess. Seli crossed her arms and said that if people were going to call her that, he would have to become her knight, and Ray was astonished when Seli ordered him to accompany her to the launch. Ray tried to oppose, but Lee stopped him, gave him a stern look, and insisted on taking command. Ray lost to her again and bowed. They then sat on the grass with a basket of different foods. While they ate, Seli admits she was surprised because she didn't know he was that strong. She asked whether he planned to major in swordsmanship at the academy. Ray replied that it's his plan, saying he'll try every basic course he can, not just swordsmanship, and then stick with the ones that suit him best. He added he'll probably focus on swordsmanship and business, or on interspecies folklore and magical theory, because his family's domain is a maritime trade hub with contacts abroad, and he figured he should study those subjects. He asks Seli what she'll major in. She says she plans to study business and swordsmanship, and she's actually quite skilled with a sword. She sighed suddenly because she won't be able to take that many classes. Half of her day has to be devoted to her royal consort training. Ray tried to lighten the mood by asking if she planned to join the student council. That made Lee sadder. Knowing Prince Alex will almost certainly be an officer, she feels she must join too, but she admits she would rather not because the idea is a little daunting. Ray assumes Prince Alex and Celine are not getting along very well. That made him angry. She told him not to bring that up even if he was thinking it. Ray was stunned and apologized right away. Sally's mood did not change, and she admitted she couldn't shake the feeling that His Highness was avoiding her, and despite holding him in the highest esteem, he was distant whenever they met, and she wondered if she had done something to offend him, though she could think of nothing. Ray understands how hard this is for her. Seli thought he could be the knight to protect her from every worry, but rabies made her reject him immediately. He needed to care for his people and return to his domain after graduating. Seli was still upset by his bluntness. Ray tried to ease her sadness by promising that while they were at the academy, he would do everything he could to help, even though meeting would be hard because she was engaged to the first prince, and he would always be there to listen as a school friend, so Seli felt happy and began to count on him. She added that they could end up in the same class and sit next to each other, and if there were no other free tables, they'd just share one, and Ray seemed to have trouble understanding that. However, Sally said she had been counting on him when those things might have happened. Ray smiled and told her to go easy on him. Then Sally's knights called for them because it was time to leave. Later, they resumed their journey. Knights rode at the front while Ray sat at the back of the carriage with his horse, close enough to see Saline. Eventually, they reached the royal capital. Ray waved goodbye to the knights. Seli was surprised to hear he was leaving so soon. He said he was heading straight to the academy dorm. She seemed to want Ray to stay, so Sally offered to stop by their estate in the capital, where he could even stay the night since they had plenty of rooms, but Ray declined her offer. He said he needs to check on his luggage, which should have arrived, and has other things to take care of before the schools start. Sally understood and decided to meet him at the entrance ceremony, and Ray agreed with her and made sure to come and find her. They wave goodbye to each other until the carriage moves on. Then he rode his horse to the Royal Academy. He smiled when he saw the school where he was about to enroll, and assuming the dorm was on the same grounds, he quickly followed a path that led there. On entering, a woman quickly assisted him and welcomed him to the Exiled Royal Academy. They told him his room is 305 on the 3rd floor, and his luggage has already been delivered. The woman said it is still spring break, so campus cafes and restaurants are closed, but the dormitory dining hall is open for meals, or he can eat at an off-campus eatery. Ray understood and went straight to his room. As soon as the door closed, the two spirits called to him and asked to see the room, so Ray said it was safe to come out. Both immediately emerged and someone scanned the room excitedly. Ray went to the window and opened it. From there he could see the Royal Academy. His 3 years at the academy were about to begin. He wondered what kind of person he would have become by the time he graduated. Dine said he would certainly be a fine gentleman. Ray smiled, hoping he would be. He rolled up his sleeve and set to work cleaning the room, unpacking, and getting everything organized while Sylphie played happily on the bed. He said he was helping with his luggage. Ray looks worried because Sylphie might use his wind to carry it. Dawn arrived. Sylphie woke Ray up. At the window, he was mesmerized by the beautiful view. Sylphie asks what his errand is today. He says he's already finished tidying his room. First, he'll have breakfast in the cafeteria, then go shopping for daily necessities, and afterwards he had to visit the marble company as requested. Sylphie felt confused about his work. While changing clothes, he said it was an errand from his father. His father asks too much of him, but Sylphie understands because his father rarely gets the chance to come to the capital himself. Later, he went to the cafeteria and had sausage, eggs, hot tea, and bread. He scanned the room for a table, ready to eat. Only 5 students were in the cafeteria, but they seemed to be in their own world. Before the entrance ceremony even began, he pictured the students split into nobles and commoners, and after eating he cleared his dishes, went to the counter, thanked the woman and said the food was delicious, and she looked surprised but thanked Ray for telling her. Ray was surprised when the woman asked if he was a new student because she didn't recognize him. He agrees and asks whether she remembers every student's face, and she laughs, saying she does not remember every single student, but working in the cafeteria every day gives you a feel for people. The woman added that the stripes on his uniform sleeves show which year he's in, and when Ray understood, she went on to say she can usually tell whether someone is a noble or a commoner by their mannerisms and attitude. Apparently, she's caught Ray's interest and asks which one she thinks he is. The lady studied him and decided he was a commoner with unusually refined manners, but he was too casual to be a noble. At last, the woman said he is a merchant or the son of a well-to-do family. Ray laughs at her because he's technically a noble, not a merchant, though he's only a country noble from the backwoods. Startled, the lady immediately apologized for saying rude things to a young noble and explained she had assumed he was a commoner because he was so friendly. Ray said it wasn't rude and she didn't need to apologize, adding that his noble parents did not make him special, which left the lady confused and finding him strange. She warned him to be cautious because some people there are real elitists. Ray remembers the warning and promises to act carefully. Remembering her daughter, the lady said Anna is starting at the Royal Academy as a student, and she is proud that a commoner got in, so she asks Ray to be Anna's friend if she can, and when Ray agreed. The woman warned him not to make a move on her daughter no matter how handsome he was. Ray told her he was there to study seriously and would not do that, but said if anything did happen, he could at least help her daughter. He waved goodbye to the woman. After Ray left, the woman thought her daughter seemed to like his type and worried she might get carried away with him. Preparing to leave, Ray found the two spirits too excited, so he told them to be quiet until he finished his business. They agreed, and as he passed through the gate, he waved goodbye to the guard. He is walking toward the capital. The place amazes him because it truly stands out among the many huge buildings around. Wandering around, he notices how lively the place is and that people seem to live stable lives. Walking on, he grew confused trying to find the marble company, so he took out a piece of paper and checked the directions. A signboard hanging on the building's wall caught his eye. Approaching the building, he was stunned by its size. Walking into the building, he found it bigger than he expected. It embarrassed him because everyone inside was dressed in fancy clothes. He worried whether his casual clothes were appropriate. Still doubting his memory, he thinks the head of that company is Enzel's brother, the chief of their merchant guild, and wonders whether they look alike. His eyes widened when a heavyset man arrived and apologized for keeping him waiting, introduced himself as Helmut, the head of the marble company, and left Ray speechless as he thought they were the same in every way except for their hair. Despite that, he paid a courtesy call, gave his name, and said he had come to greet him on his father's behalf, adding that he was surprised by how much Helmut resembled Lord Enzel. The man laughed that he heard that a lot, and then asked Ray whether his brother was properly fulfilling his duties as chief of the Cruiser Commercial Guild. Ray replied that they were always indebted to Enzel because Cruiser's prosperity and development would have been impossible without the guild's cooperation, and Helmut was amazed at how composed he was for his young age. He said his brother had praised him in letters, calling him someone with the makings of an ocean king who would one day rule the Magnalia Inland Sea, and Ray felt shy because being an ocean king seemed far too much, enough with the pleasantries. Helmut grew serious and asked what Ray wanted to discuss, and Ray explained that Cruiser territory holds several ancient ruins, but many are on uninhabited, monster-filled islands, so they have made little progress with excavations or finding people to help. After hearing this, Helmut suggested it would be best to ask the Adventurers Guild in the royal capital for support, when Helmut asked if he should put in a good word for Rai. The latter agrees at once. There's a guild in Cruiser, but it's much smaller than the capital's main guild. They also need someone to appraise the magic stones and artifacts recovered from the ruins, so it would be a great help if Helmut knew anyone suitable for that task. The man realized it would probably be faster to get the Adventurers Guild to find an appraiser, so he prepared a letter of introduction for him. Helmut can help, and his brother will again bring many rare new goods, so their company and the people of Cruiser must strengthen their ties. Ray agreed and said they are always indebted to the Commercial Guild. They shook hands to seal the agreement and looked forward to continuing their partnership. After the talk, Helmut saw him off and waved goodbye. Stepping out of the marble company, Sylphie suddenly appeared, and he was relieved the hardest part was over, but Ray still had work and planned to visit the Adventurers Guild another day. For now, he plans to wander around town and do some shopping. Sylphie grew excited when Ray suddenly stopped after hearing something. He asked Sylphie to bring him the sounds from the area. He closed his eyes and clearly heard someone yelling, trying to stop another, the voice ordering others not to come near it. The voice asked who sent them and tried to kidnap him, but the kidnapper's voice refused to say, citing client confidentiality, and Ray frowned because the kidnapping was happening in the middle of the city. Deciding to help, he asked Sylphie to show him where the voice came from. Instead, Yuri Anastasia's voice sounded taken off guard as she yelled at the kidnappers, demanded to know what they wanted, mocked them for ganging up on a single girl, and dared them to prove they were real men by fighting her one-on-one. The 5 kidnappers weren't fooled by her words. Having already done their homework on her, they knew she planned to use her precious holy magic. They mock her as a saintess and click their tongues, calling her unseemly. Yuri resigned herself to bad luck. Raised in a downtown orphanage, she is now cornered by 5 assassins. Against a single opponent, her holy magic might be enough, but facing 5 at once is too much. If something happens to her, it will cause trouble for her foster father, so she has to do something, and one of the 5 men warned his companion to keep their guard up as they walked toward her to catch her. Yuri closed her eyes, accepting her fate. A sudden wind sprang up, confusing the kidnappers. In an instant, Yuri had disappeared from sight when they looked up. They spotted her there with Ray, who was helping her. Yuri still looked puzzled about what had happened and asked when she had climbed onto the roof who he was and whether he had come to save her. Ray said he had planned to save her. Ray told her they needed to get away from the assassins. Yuri looked confused about how they could escape and Ray smiled, telling her to leave it to him. Apologizing ahead of time, he carried her. Yuri felt flustered by his sudden action. When he jumped, she wondered what was happening. Her worried expression turned toward. They were happy after a group of birds joined them. Meanwhile, Ray kept jumping from roof to roof. Yuri wondered whether they were flying or bouncing, but it didn't matter because it was amazing. Once they reached a safe place, blushing, Yuri thanked Ray for saving her and introduced herself to him. Ray also introduced himself. Sitting on the edge, Yuri remembers what happened earlier and asks Ray whether they were flying and what kind of levitation magic he used. Ray said it wasn't magic but the power of a wind spirit, and Yuri was glad because she had sensed a wind swirling while they flew and now noticed a breeze nearby. Ray was surprised because it was so rare. It was rare for Sylphie to take a liking to someone, and he was curious who the girl was. He asked Yuri if she could sense the spirit's presence, and she replied that she felt it only faintly. Ray grew serious and asked Yuri who the men from earlier were, since they seemed to know her and had been trying to kidnap her. Yuri hesitates to tell him because she worries it will cause him trouble. Ray didn't push her, but he would be glad if she did, since it would be easier for him to handle things knowing the situation. Yuri shares his opinion. Giving her name, she says she is the adopted daughter of the noble house Anastasia. When Ray learned she came from a count's household and thought she was the count's daughter, he immediately bowed and apologized for being rude, but Yuri stopped him, explaining she was adopted and had been an orphan who was taken in by a count's family by chance. She said the men from earlier were likely sent by her foster father's rivals. Many believe that adopting her will make him the next archbishop, and some people are desperate to stop it. Ray couldn't see why adopting her would make him the next archbishop. Yuri said that was presumptuous, and that in public she is known as the saintess. Ray's eyes widen when he hears she's a saint. Yuri says she received a divine oracle and can use holy magic, though she's not that special. Her foster father, now a cardinal, happens to have a daughter with the power of a saintess, but Ray interrupts and assumes that Ray's is the father's standing too. Yuri said her father has nothing to do with that. He is not raising her as a saintess or for any similar reason. He is protecting her so her power is not used that way. She clenched her teeth and told Ray that her father truly cares for her and let her attend the academy to keep her safe, and Ray apologized, saying he hadn't meant to speak ill of her foster father. He said they seemed to have a wonderful relationship, and Yuri agrees because her foster father was very kind. She says that although he is both a count and a cardinal, he treats all orphans with equal kindness, so she does not want to cause him any worry. She asked Ray to keep the whole accident a secret. Ray worried the kidnappers might attack again. Yuri told him she'll be fine since she'll be starting at the academy and was sure they wouldn't be able to reach her easily when surrounded by so many other students. After she mentioned the academy, Ray wondered if it was the Royal Academy, and Yuri agrees. He tells him he's actually going to enroll there too. Yuri was happy to hear he was going to the same academy as her savior, but Ray stopped her because the savior was laying it on a bit thick, and Yuri insisted since it was the truth, saying that if the savior was not good for Ray, she would replace her with the hero, which Ray thought was worse, so he retaliated. He told her that if she was going to say that, because she was the saint, he would start calling her Lady Yuri. She refuses and calls him Lord Ray because it feels natural for her to call him that as her savior. Ray wanted to argue with that. Then their eyes met, and they both laughed at once. Apologizing, Ray says that at the academy, if she agrees, he will call her Yuri, and she smiles sweetly and accepts. Before long, Yuri realized she needed to get down from the roof. Ray offered his hand to Yuri, his eyes widening when Yuri said it would be a waste to just go straight down. She asks him to repeat that whoosh sound from earlier one more time. He declined, saying they were just going down. In his mind, Sylphie was insisting again. The spirit seems to think it's all a game, and she doesn't mind at all. At last, the Exiled Royal Academy entrance ceremony arrived. Ray straightened his clothes. Dane said it had finally begun. Over the next 3 years, Ray planned to focus entirely on studying and making friends. Sylphie brightened at Ray's talk about making friends, so he explained it means forming friendships, and she hopes he will make many. Ray decided to go, but told the two to stay out of sight. Excitement fills the academy, especially Alex Exiled. A smile spreads across his face as the academy arc finally begins. The entrance ceremony he has been waiting for all this time. In those days when he woke up in the body of a 5-year-old prince on a luxurious bed. Bewildered, he found himself in a child's body. He was fairly sure he was an 18-year-old high school student. At this moment, he was Alex Exiled, the first prince of the Exiled kingdom. It hit him that he'd been in an accident on his graduation day, so he was probably reincarnated into another world. Memories from 5 years as a prince flooded in, separate from his 18 years of life. More precisely, it felt like the 18 years of his past life had been added to the memories of the 5-year-old prince. Using the combined memory, this world is exactly like the real fantasy, the game he had played extensively. In this world, Prince Alex is one of several protagonists. The game had a multi-story system with 7 playable characters, and Prince Alex was the most popular and the only one with a harem route. In the mirror, he saw his blue eyes and blonde hair, the picture of a perfect prince, and he believed he was 16 when the game began. If this is truly the game's world, he already knows everything that will happen. Now the world is his to command. Delighted, he climbed into bed, certain his life was now a guaranteed win. The butler noticed it, so the old man asked if he'd had a bad dream. In his mind, the game's story had bad endings. For example, Prince Alex can be dethroned by his half-brother Siegfried, who becomes king, and Alex runs off to become an adventurer, but that only happens if he makes bad choices. He already knew the upcoming scenarios and the correct choices. If he plays it right, he can choose the harem route and get the exact harem he wants, and by raising all his stats from age 5 he can meet the conditions, but if he can't get the harem, he can still reach a true ending with one heroine. He left his gloomy past and 20 years without a girlfriend behind because a glorious, popular prince's life lay ahead. A sudden interruption broke his deep thoughts. From Eric and Aries. Aries was happy to attend the academy with his childhood friends and hoped they'd be in the same class. Eric said that if he and Alex took first and second on the entrance exam, they could dominate any class competition. He urged his friends, as future leaders of the country, to show everyone their excellence. Aries admits he might fall behind them academically, but can help a lot with the sword. Alex smiles, knowing he must work hard to avoid falling behind and to become a worthy king. They agree that Eric will serve as his right hand, and Aries will be the sword that protects them both. Alex forces a smile, but inside he is dying of embarrassment over their cheesy line. This is the world of true fantasy, where things that would have felt cringy before now feel just right, and it shows the kind of confidence a character guaranteed to win can have. At the Royal Academy, the long-awaited academic arc begins, and the story made just for him unfolds. When they entered the academy, he expected the girls to swarm him because he was the prince. He thought the opposite. Students were busy checking the bulletin to find their class. He looked disappointed and figured everyone was curious about their class, so it's no surprise they weren't paying attention to their surroundings. With that in mind, he told Aries it's too crowded and he can't get near the bulletin board. While Ray searched for his classroom, he heard a voice shouting to get out of the. They headed that way because the first prince was about to check the notice board. Stunned, Alex realized Aries seemed to have the wrong idea. Alex knew Aries' bio, definitely short-tempered and all muscle, but Aries still looked like he was trying to sabotage his image. Alex was worried because all eyes turned on him. If Alex follows Aries while everyone is watching, he might raise his favorability. Clearing his throat, he told everyone it was fine because each person would find out their class, and once they checked they could leave, so there was no need to panic. Aries started to protest, but Alex cut him off and said it was fine. He pointed out that princes and commoners were both academy students, so no one should get special treatment. Inside, Alex was pleased he delivered the line, and now people saw him as a tolerant prince who calmly corrected his subordinates' rudeness. He was surprised when Seli suddenly arrived and scolded Aries for setting a bad example of a noble. Seli was a flawless, beautiful heroine from a noble family, and she was his fiancée. Alex struggles with her. She's pretty but intense, so he prefers a quieter girl. Seli still scolds Aries when Alex interrupts her, even though Aries plans to act like a gentleman and answer graciously. Aries told Seli to let it go because other students already saw them, and since he seems to be reflecting, they must forgive him. Still, Aries didn't seem upset, while Sally remained angry. Alex didn't see why he had to be the one calming people down, so he told them to make up and check the board together. Eric had already checked the board and said Alex, Aries, and he were in the same class, so Alex grabbed his head in frustration when he learned Sally was also in their class. Alex punched the air because unscripted moves were too unpredictable. Eric noticed and asked if something was wrong. Alex paused and decided it was a good moment to bring the talk back to class. He told Eric nothing was wrong and forced a smile. Then he asked whether anyone else in their class had caught Eric's attention. Eric's stepsister and the Anastasia family's daughter were also in their class, and Alex recognizes this matches the script. And even though his past life told him the Anastasia family had only a son, he still asks about it. Eric agreed, but a year earlier the Anastasia family had adopted a girl said to be a vessel for a saint, and when Alex heard this he pretended to want to meet her, while already convinced she was a saint and one of the heroine candidates. Eric said the adopted person had been a commoner raised in an orphanage and told him to distance himself from her because he had noble blood. Alex expected those words because Eric was a noble elitist. As an understanding prince, he should have rebuked that attitude, but Seli cut him off just as he was about to speak and asked Eric if he was really looking down on a fellow student because she was a commoner. She reminded him that the adopted girl was a saint blessed by God and was now his daughter, so he must not insult someone like that. Alex was terrified because her words would only make the proud Eric angrier. Alex cleared his throat when he saw his four-eyed friend about to explode. Eric had just said those words to tease him before saying he understood, but he wants them to know he has been blessed by the gods. Alex turns to Lei and advises her not to raise her voice in front of the other students, since that is not how a proper lady behaves. Calmly, he asks them not to bicker on a day as important as the entrance ceremony, and tells them to forgive each other for his sake. Inside, he rejoiced knowing he had proven himself a gentle, understanding prince who brings peace. On the moon, he heard that the two understood and obeyed him. This was a crucial opening scene for Alex because he would meet the heroines in the next scene. Seli excused herself, ending his long wait. Even after checking their class, Aries and Eric waved goodbye. Anxiety builds because his next scene is when he meets the heroine. He wasn't sure if he'd messed something up. Ray watched Alex's group get more complicated, and when Sylphie offered to call out Silly he refused, curious but not in a position to get involved, so he decided to speak to Silly later and kept watching the area. His gaze turned to the man studying the board. Sensing that someone might be staring, the man turns and asks Ray. Apologizing, he explains that his hair is like the first Prince Alex's, so he found himself staring. The man said they have different hair and eye colors, and that Ray has a keen eye. The other person immediately bowed and apologized for being so rude, and for not realizing the man was Prince Siegfried, the Exiled kingdom's second son and Alex's half-brother, but Siegfried let it pass and said there was no need to be so formal. At school, they were just classmates, and he held out his hand. Ray agrees and introduces himself as Ray Cruiser, heir to the Vice-County of Cruiser. Siegfried realized he was the son of a noble, but since Ray did not know who he was, Siegfried assumed he must be from a rural territory. Sighing, Ray admitted he was from a rural town that takes a month to travel one way to the capital, so he had no ties to the capital's power struggles and no interest in them. And when Siegfried repeated the word, Ray looked confused and made it clear he wasn't the least bit interested. Stunned, his jaw dropped when Siegfried suddenly put a hand on his shoulder to show he found him interesting, and he kept laughing because he couldn't believe those words. Then he realized he had been rude and apologized. They were in the same class, so Dee told Ray to call him C and speak normally, dropping the formal politeness because he had decided Ray would be his friend. They shake hands, much to their surprise. Suddenly another hand rests on theirs. A girl, also in Class D, asks them to get along with each other. She sighed sharply when the two did not recognize her. She introduced herself as Melty Suzerain. Siegfried recognized the surname as that of the great Archmage Suzerain and had heard the Archmage took a disciple among this year's new students. He wondered if the disciple was this girl. Melta didn't respond and only gave him a questioning look. Ray apologized, unsure whether to call her Ms. Suzerain or just Melta, and she told him to call her Melta. Siegfried kept asking if she needed anything, and Melta said that since they were both in Class D, they were all going to the same place, so if they were heading to the classroom, they should take her along. None of the three noticed they were still holding hands when another girl arrived. Yuri Anastasia was the saintess and the adopted daughter of the Count of House Anastasia, and she asks Ray if the handshake is the new style. She thought something interesting was happening, and Melt explained it was a gesture to shake hands with the new students in their class, but Yuri didn't seem to understand. As they walked, Melt said Yuri was in Class A. Yuri objected and insisted on being in Class D with them. They didn't notice someone watching. They pointed to the prince and his entourage, including the prince's fiancée, even spotting the second prince and the heroine candidates, the saintess and the archmage disciple, and then looked at Ray, an unfamiliar face, assuming he was only a background character. He said the first prince is underwhelming. This appears to be a route focused on the second prince. The mysterious man skipped the prologue in his past life and did not know, but what matters is what happens next. He was now unsure whether the protagonist was the first prince, the second prince, or the heroine on a path to becoming queen. Ray seemed to sense someone watching them. He immediately dismissed it as his imagination, Then two spirits spoke in his mind and said he had made several friends at school on his first day. Ray agrees, but as the heir to a mere viscounty, he feels out of place among people far above his station. All he wants is a peaceful, uneventful school life. Melty couldn't remember anything from when she was a baby. From what she's been told, she was abandoned as a child. Left alone deep in the forest. Picked up on a whim by Suzerain, the great archmage and eccentric recluse who detested human contact. She can't explain why she chose to care for such a helpless infant, and the reason remains unknown. In time, the child raised by Suzerain grew up. It ended up being a clear example of someone completely unable to interact socially and with poor communication skills. After watching her one day, Suzerain told the child to go to school. Melt felt lost among all the people, Suzerain, who had no social skills. He was the one who told her to go to school and learn social skills. Following instructions, she went to the academy. Students were noisy as they checked the bulletin board for their names. Melty still sat alone in the corner. She wants to check her name on the assignment board, but could be pushed out of the crowd because she is small. Initially, she wanted to use her magic to remove obstacles. She decided not to use it and stopped using her power because it was dangerous. If she causes a commotion at the academy, she will get in trouble and could be expelled. If she is kicked out, Susan will punish her, aware that it could put her in danger. She sat and waited until the crowds cleared, then the first prince group arrived. Ares shouted for them to move out of the way. Her chance came when she read on the bulletin that the crowd had cleared the way. Without hesitation, she rushed to the bulletin. Some people act tough, but it will be fine if she keeps her distance. Reviewing the bulletin that listed classes A and B separately, she saw two people in class A with Vaughn surnames and remembers Susan saying to be careful around anyone with a Vaughn name. She wondered why he was supposed to be wary of those people. Suzerain might have said why, but she must have forgotten because she didn't care. After checking her class, she wasn't sure what to do next. She had three options. First, go home and take a nap. Second, go home and eat. Third, go home and have a snack. Nothing about it feels right when I'm deep in thought. From behind her, a man suddenly spoke, asked if they were in Class D, and assumed they were classmates. Turning around, she checked who it was since they were in the same class. They were Siegfried and Ray. If she follows them, she will not go wrong. Watching them shake hands, she realized classmates should greet each other with a handshake, which would be perfect for improving her social skills. It is her lucky day, so she moves closer to Siegfried and Ray. They were startled when she suddenly put her hands on them. She told them she was in the same class and encouraged them to get along. Ray, Siegfried, and Yuri looked confused as Melta raised her hands, relieved she had met her quota for the day. Ray, Siegfried, Melta, and Yuri walked down the hallway looking for their rooms. When the three of them found their room, Yuri didn't want to leave and looked ready to cry. She hugged Melta immediately, wanting to stay longer, but because she wasn't in the same class as the other three, they left her outside the room. Inside the room, Siegfried waited calmly for their teacher. Three girls noticed him and couldn't stop staring. Other students also find Melta adorable because she is so tiny. Meanwhile, no one pays attention to Ray. Finally, their teacher arrived and introduced herself as Miriam Stanford. She will lead the entire class for the next 3 years. Specializing in magical system theory, she teaches the elective on magical systems and invited students to sign up if interested. She asked everyone to begin with their introductions and said we would go in order from the front row. Students introduced themselves one by one until it was Siegfried's turn. The girls wondered whether he came from a royal family. Siegfried said he was the second prince of the Exiled kingdom, but despite being royalty, he was still just a student like everyone else and would be happy if they treated him as a classmate regardless of his status or noble lineage. Confident in both swordsmanship and magic, he urged the class to push each other and do their best, and everyone listened, even Ray, who was overwhelmed by his presence. When the speech ended, Siegfried smiled at Rai. The female students misunderstood him and thought he was waving at them. After that, Miriam calls Melt, who seems sleepy. One student thought Melt was cute when she stood up because she was so small, while others wondered if she was their age. Melt heard them but didn't pay attention. Melty began introducing herself and said her special skill is original magic, then she immediately sat down. The students were confused because her short speech left them expecting more. Ray couldn't help but smile because this was the classic Melty, completely in her own world. Soon after, Ray saw 4 students ahead of him and overheard people say none of them stood out, and someone added that only Siegfried could match Lord Flaga, which made the man in the center smile. After the previous student finished, he stood up reluctantly and asked permission to show how he stood above the other classmates. Flaga Landon introduced himself, said his house ranks among the nation's most distinguished noble families, and that they intend to live up to that prestigious name, and added that they can expect great things from him. Planning to represent their class and run for the student council, he glanced at Siegfried, said there was no doubt Siegfried wanted the same position, and made clear he would not hold back in the contest. Flaga declared that those of noble birth like him are naturally superior, and that commoners and lower-ranking nobles should at least show him the respect he deserves. When he finished, his 3 subordinates rejoiced at his speech. Siegfried seemed bored and sighed, not caring and having no intention of competing with Flaga. It was Ray's turn. Standing up, he introduced himself. His family's lands were far from the capital, and this was his first visit to the royal city. He admitted he might cause some trouble as a country bumpkin, but hoped to get along with everyone. After his speech, some students applauded, but Flaga mocked him because he had never heard of the Cruiser family. He even calls Ray a country boy and offers to be his vassal. Flaga's mood shifted when Ray rejected his offer. The latter froze in terror when Flaga suddenly flew into a rage and shouted at him for refusing his generous offer, even insulting him as a mere viscount for daring to defy a marquis like him. Ray stayed silent and calmly told Flaga that the arrangements would benefit neither of them. He recalled that the Lansdowne family's domain was on the southern side of the royal capital, while their territory was far to the north. It took 2 whole months to travel to and from the capital, so making someone from such a distant land a vassal did not seem practical. Flogus smirked at his explanation and insisted that under their family's protection, he would have influence in the royal capital, and even boasted that his father had been a council member of the Lords. Ray heard he was gaining influence in the capital and said he was even less interested, which made Flaga angry. Ray explains that after graduation he will return to his territory, since even if he gained influence in the royal capital, it would be too far away to matter and offer no real way to use it. Smiling at Flaga, he suggests giving those to someone who actually cares about capital politics. Ray's eyes widened when Flaga angrily said he was offering to make him a subordinate. He refuses, saying he's not interested and sees no benefit. When someone laughs, Flaga turns his head to the side. Siegfried insulted Flaga for losing to Ray. He said becoming his vassal wouldn't benefit Ray, and aligning with the non-folk family would make more sense because their territory is much closer. Both Her Majesty the Queen Dowager and his elder brother's fiancé were born into that family, so there is no need to rely on the distant Lansdowne estate. Hearing those words, Flaga became furious and fixed a deadly stare on Siegfried and Ray. When the room goes quiet, Miriam tells everyone to end their small arguments and stands to give a quick announcement to all. The Royal Academy operated on merit, she said. Whether it's magic, swordsmanship, or academics, completion is allowed. They are free to challenge each other as much as they like. Personal disputes are strictly forbidden. Anyone who challenges someone must do so properly under the official rules. Rank does not matter, whether commoner, low-ranking noble, or high-ranking noble. Winning proves strength and losing shows weakness. Their parents' status offers no protection. The instructor makes sure the students fully understand the rule. Then she called on the next person to continue the introduction. Ray wasn't sure he was saved. He wished Miriam had stepped in sooner and wondered if she had waited for the right moment to be more effective. Then he noticed someone staring at him. He looked down and saw that the ugly Flaga was still furious. After the class ended, Ray sighed with relief. He was taken aback when Flaga slammed the desk and told him not to get cocky just because he had a few petty noble titles. Ray kept quiet and let it slide, then heard Siegfried laughing off to the side. Frowning, he asked if he was enjoying the commotion. Siegfried apologized and explained Flaga has an extremely talented older brother, so he has no authority at home, which probably makes him act bossy in public and flaunt his rank, assuming Ray would submit if Flaga flashed his noble title. Ray crosses his arms and says he'd wag his tail and accept defeat if it was earned by real skill, but he won't bow just because someone inherited power. Siegfried agreed and said that's what makes him so odd. Most people would wag their tails and crawl into the light. A high-ranking noble addressed them. Few people turn down that offer, except those who keep trailing Flaga like a dog. Ray can't stand people who rely on their parents' power to act superior. That doesn't impress anyone, so Siegfried was confused because he was his family's heir but had no official title. Ray replied that he was not a viscount yet but held a senior naval rank, and Siegfried was surprised because he had served in the military as an officer. Ray added that even though his father outranks him, his father works him to the bone, and as a major he has no subordinates and is more like a lone soldier who steps in to help during emergencies. He also said he had taken part in pirate hunts and in killing monsters, and Siegfried could not believe it. Siegfried tapped Ray on the shoulder because he found him interesting, and lucky for Ray, he made a cool friend on his first day, with Siegfried happy while Ray looked unsure if getting his attention would be good or bad for him. Siegfried told him seriously that he doesn't mind being called the second prince because he actually appreciates the title. Even without him, Ray couldn't avoid standing out, so he must consider it a prophecy. His words make Ray more worried because he doesn't like the sound of it. After all, it might happen. Siegfried says it's not a prediction because he's already friends with the saint and the disciple of a grand mage, and like it or not, he was born under a star that makes him stand out. Ray was sweating as he listened, because the man might say he was also friends with the future queen candidate, and Ray wondered how he would react. Melty tagged his clothes to get attention, then turned and asked her what was wrong. To his surprise, Melta yells at him and demands more about the monster hunt he mentioned earlier. He didn't know where to look because Melta insisted on hearing everything, even the pirate raids. Siegfried appeared nonchalant, but it was unclear if he was angry. He presses him to spill everything so he can hear the details, and Ray looks caught off guard. In the end, they were told to grab some food and take their time. Meanwhile, in A class, homeroom teacher Ernest von Linsuna greets his students. He told everyone he serves as head of the year and was looking forward to working with them for the next 3 years. He points out that the academy has always been built on merit, and while people can prove their abilities in many ways, class competition is the most important. Each level first competes to pick its top class, then the winners face off in a grade competition to name the academy's strongest. Each class selects 5 top students to represent it, and students should aim to be among those 5. The competition is in the fall, so there's still time. They must train hard every day. He then announced their introduction and said they would start in the front row. Seli listened attentively to their teacher. Alex was nervous about introducing himself. Seli thought that because Prince Alex, Ares, and Eric were in Class A, they would probably be chosen, that she and Yuri the Saint would be included, and that Eric's sister would be picked as the reserved member. This means the team is already set. Class A is full of high-ranking nobles and their children, so the competition is rigged from the start, and their homeroom teacher Ernest, the Queen's brother and Prince Alex's uncle, will be biased. Before the competition starts, she is already worried about how it will turn out and suddenly remembers Ray and what he might have been doing. Surprise crossed her face when Eric praised Alex's excellent introduction. If Prince Alex's turn is over, she could lose herself in thought. Alex looked calm but was sweating because the introduction had made him nervous. The game never showed scenes so detailed, and he hoped he had introduced himself like a proper prince. Judging by Eric's approving face, it seemed he had. Alex remembered that one of the heroines, the saint, should be in his class, so he turned his head from side to scan every student and his gaze landed on Yuri Anastasia as she introduced herself. She said people called her a saint, which embarrassed her because she was just an ordinary girl, and she added that she would be happy if everyone could get along. Alex's eyes widen as he stares at Yuri. He finds her amazing and even more graceful in person. Following the saint's route, he thought she would become his girlfriend, and on the harem route, he could make all the heroines his girlfriends, which makes him more motivated, while Yuri sighed with relief after her introduction ended. Surrounded by strangers, she felt very nervous. Worried her introduction might sound awkward, she kept telling herself it was fine. She would have preferred being placed in Class D with Ray and Melta, because she worried she might not make friends in a class full of high-ranking nobles. Closing her eyes, she pushed her worries away. At the orphanage, she had never imagined attending an academy like this, and although she felt unsure about whether to be grateful, she was thankful because she met Ray and became friends with him. She remembered Ray rescuing her and carrying her like a princess. She couldn't help feeling embarrassed because she thought it was just a rescue operation. Seli notices how quickly her expressions change. Ernest announced the real lesson would begin and told them to prepare starting tomorrow, then their class ended. As the 3 students greeted her, Seli looked surprised when they asked if she had plans after class and invited her to tea, but she politely declined and said she had to visit the castle later. All 3 girls were astounded and assumed she would meet a member of the royal family, and they were surprised when she said the king would personally guide her as part of her training to become queen. Everyone naturally adores her. They began questioning her about what lessons she had received and whether that was royal etiquette, and they asked if she had studied economics, leadership, and other advanced subjects, but Seli couldn't answer because they all talked at once, so she just laughed. Finding her busy, the 3 girls decided to leave. Seli thanked them and suggested inviting her when she was free. Smiling, she waved goodbye to them. Sally sighed, realizing they only wanted her because she was a potential queen, and saw Yuri still in her chair, deep in thought. She had second thoughts about which elective to choose. She figured Ray would probably pick swordsmanship, but Ray was terrible at it. Economics was another option, but she didn't really want that either. If she chose magic, her eyes widened because Melt might be taking it too. Relieved, she was thankful because it would give her peace in her academic life. Suddenly, Seli interrupted her thoughts and her jaw dropped. Lady Seli stands above others as a noble, the first prince's fiancée, and a candidate to become queen. Seli asked if she had startled her, feeling curious because she seemed deep in thought, but Yuri was totally fine. She explained she struggled to decide on her elective classes. Seli advised that, since she was a saint, electives that reflected that would be best. Embarrassed, Yuri asked her not to call her a saint, to just call her Yuri. Seli said the academy does not offer courses specifically for clergy. For practical study, ancient history or magical theory would be good options. For skill development, magic refinement would suit her. She told Seli she is thinking of taking a magic course because a friend in another class is enrolling. Still undecided about the rest, she'll try a few now and decide later whether to continue. Seli agrees and compliments Yuri's friend as a good match, noting she won't know if some classes suit her until she actually takes them, and Yuri agrees but still finds it hard to tell. Seli still envies Yuri for having a friend who gives such good advice. Smiling, the saint explained that they were in different classes, so she didn't know anyone in Class A and felt a little lonely. Yuri was taken aback when Seli suddenly stood and offered to be her friend, and wondered why a duke's daughter and future queen candidate would want to be friends with her. Seli, also a count's daughter, was confused and told Yuri there was no reason to feel intimidated, but Yuri said Seli was a saint and had once been a commoner, which did not add up, so Seli became sad and gave up if the saint did not like the idea, and Yuri, worried to see the future queen candidate upset, quickly said she did not mean that. Yuri didn't expect Seli to change her mood so quickly. Remembering Ray's advice, she tries different things and keeps going when they feel right. The future queen candidate suddenly took her hand, said she was happy to have made a friend, and looked forward to spending time with her. Meanwhile, Ray sneezed and Seli might remember him. A while later, Sylphie asked Ray to play, but Ray was busy preparing something for tomorrow and asked her to give him a second. Sylphie throws a tantrum because Ray hasn't played with him since they arrived at the academy, and Ray apologizes. Dine cuts in and tells Sylphie not to bother Ray. Sylphie wanted to argue but was cut off. Sylphie stopped and calmly flew over to Ray to see what he was doing. Ray apologized again, saying he couldn't use his powers freely because there were too many people around the academy and the dorms, and that tomorrow's class would be practical magical training. Hearing Ray was counting on him, Sylphie grew excited, thinking they would get to play. Drifting around the dorm, he hummed. Ray turned to Dine and apologized for not being able to pay much attention since they arrived. Dine said it was fine, just being with him was enough for her. She said that getting to go on a date with him once in a while would be enough for her. Sylphie was still young, so when he heard the word date he got excited and wanted to go too. Dine was confused because the young spirit did not even know what a date was. Ray kept thinking about the practical magic class and wondered what kind of magic everyone would use. Morning arrived and students from Class D gathered for their magic lesson. Flaga goes first, casting his magic at the center of the board. As expected, his subordinates cheered and praised him again for his high score, and Flaga boasted that he deserved it. Siegfried's turn came, and Lord Flaga mocked him, calling him unlucky to have to follow and warning him not to embarrass himself. Siegfried says it's odd he's proud of something so trivial, gives him a deadly look, and warns he'll put in a little effort if he keeps running his mouth. With poise, he aimed his finger at the board like a gun. Ray and Melta were taken aback by his stance. Lord Flaga mocked him for trying to be eccentric, but Siegfried ignored him and carried on. Melta was impressed as he gathered mana onto his fingertips to control it. Surprisingly, Ray could tell it. Melta explains she can even detect his rare dark traits, but she had never seen Siegfried's stance before. Ray said he'd seen that stance before from an S-rank adventurer. Siegfried cast a spell on the board, causing it to move. Melta and Ray were stunned. Miriam found its precise mana control and overwhelming power magnificent, and gave Siegfried an A+, the highest score so far. Lord Flaga became furious when he heard Siegfried's score. His three subordinates looked worried and tried to comfort him. He insisted he was much more elegant than the second prince. Lord Flaga told him that Siegfried was competent, as befits royalty, but warned him there would be no next time. Despite being shouted at and compared to a whelp, Siegfried ignores him and walks toward Ray. Siegfried passed Ray and said he had already warmed up the stage, and that he had to go on and knock that flog of a fellow down a peg. He pointed to the three women, who seemed to be his fans. Even Melta cheered for him, and Ray started sweating because he was trying not to stand out. Walking to the spot, he heard Flaga insult him for being a country noble, and he was eager to see what kind of third-rate magic he would show them. Ray ignores him, so he keeps talking and says he will use wind magic. Some students were surprised to hear he would use wind magic, some called it painfully average, and some urged him on, after which he embarrassed himself with his pathetic little spell. Those insults came from Flaga's group, and Flaga has been targeting him since the introduction while Siegfried is clearly enjoying it. Given his situation, holding back will probably encourage Flaga. Stepping forward, he grabbed a sword. While doing so, Flaga laughs and insults him again, saying country folk are hopeless and asking what he plans to do with the sword since they are in magic class. They even asked whether he understood the assignment. Ignoring them a second time, he said that since he had the chance, he should be allowed to show his specialty. With a thought he called Sylphie, raised his sword, and told the young spirit it was time for the whirlwind. Sylphie understood his assignment, summoned a gust of wind, and wrapped it around the sword. Both Siegfried and Melta were surprised when the wind gathered around his sword. Striking his sword at it, he cuts the board in half. Lord Flaga and his subordinates were stunned when it split in two. Miriam looked pleased by Ray's magic. Ray told everyone it was a flying slash, said she hadn't seen that technique in a long time, and added it felt like a father and son. He told Ray she had heard him say he didn't want to stand out, but after what he'd shown, that wish had been shattered. He was clearly a top-scoring A+. Ray felt flustered and wondered if he was overdoing it after Miriam said she hadn't seen that technique in a while, which made him curious whether she knew his father. Later, students approached him while praising him. They said it was terrific and that they had never seen anything like it. Now surrounded by them, he was asked if he had combined swordsmanship and magic because it looked cool, and others praised his incredible power, but he ignored them and insisted his technique was nothing, unaware that Flaga stood on his back, grinding his teeth in anger. He thinks he should be the one standing there instead of Ray. Siegfried would be acceptable, but he cannot accept that country bumpkin. He tells himself it was a fluke or that Ray cheated. They agreed with him since he was clearly more skilled. Like obedient dogs, they refused to accept their leader's defeat. Ray felt Flaga's intense glare. Then Siegfried suddenly shoved him and said he was impressed, something Ray never expected after Siegfried shattered the target and surpassed what Ray had imagined. The second prince keeps teasing him that he stands out the most, even if he doesn't want to. Ray felt embarrassed and asked him to stop. Siegfried continued, saying their kingdom was unlucky for someone like him who had no interest in climbing the ranks, but that did not concern him because he did not want to inherit it. Melta suddenly appears and praises them both, saying the second prince is good and Ray is incredible. She thought it was amazing, especially when he wrapped the sword in wind. Ray and Siegfried looked confused when Melty suddenly turned, drooling and clearly planning to try it too. Swords are too heavy for her, so she cannot hold one, and instead plans to make a sword of fire, already picturing it. Still irritated, Lord Flaga found the idea of firing magic with a sword absurd. A simple wind spell could not have sliced the target in two, so he gritted his teeth and suspected a trick. He accused Ray of cheating, saying no third-rate country noble could have scored higher than he did. Refusing to accept defeat, he immediately ordered his two subordinates to inspect the target and find proof that Ray had cheated, and the two students picked up the target before someone called for them to step aside. Everyone was stunned to see Melta release a massive surge of mana. Inside the forest, one foot was stepping from one branch to another. The foot belongs to Ray and Sylphie. He paused when he spotted two birds. He asks permission to come in. The birds seem to understand him. He moves quickly and runs fast. He kept going until he reached a particular area. As he expected, no one was there that early. He told Sylphie they could play there whenever they wanted. The young spirit brimmed with joy and began to spin. He drew both swords. He began training alongside Sylphie. No one noticed Sally approaching. The future queen candidate noticed something odd when leaves drifted in midair. She scanned her surroundings and was surprised to see someone who moved with refined, graceful movements. Believing the person was dancing in the wind, she watched with wide eyes. When she realized the figure was Ray, she was bewildered by his movements, so light he seemed weightless. She recalls that the cruiser house holds the divine power of wind, which explains it. She realized Ray was more than she originally thought when she saw him sparring with her guards, and he seemed to be enjoying himself much more. while Ray continued his training. Suddenly he stopped when he noticed something. Turning his head, he saw Seli, and the future queen immediately said good morning to him. He said he got up quite early. She had expected to be the first there and was surprised to see him. Ray looked worried and asked if she had not been watching him the whole time. His jaw dropped when the future queen apologized because she had been captivated and couldn't find the right moment to speak. He felt embarrassed but happy that she was the one who saw him. At his words, Sally blushes, then grows angry when she remembers he never tried to see her after the ceremony. Angrily, she asks if he's been swamped. Ray figured they'd see each other in their elective classes, and when her anger eased, she asked him to keep her company for a long while after their next business management class. Understanding her, Ray grants her wish. Since they were already there, Seli drew her sword for a quick spar with him because she preferred a partner to training alone, and Ray agreed. Spotting someone approaching, he decided to hold off for now, and Seli looked disappointed. She warns him not to back out the next time they meet. Ray agrees, then immediately turns and leaves her. Ray was already gone. Seli sighed because she had hoped they could finally have a long talk, and she watched Ray's back as she left. She wondered who could interrupt her private time with Ray. Seeing Prince, her fiancé, her eyes widened. At a loss for words, she didn't know what to say. Ray wondered if Lord Alex was the one coming and if she had been trying to be considerate. Not sensing anyone nearby, she set the idea aside. Showed respect to the first prince and bowed to him. Alex stood mesmerized and couldn't find the words. Noticing her hair tied back so it wouldn't get in the way while she swung her sword, he found it refreshing that she wore pants for training. Her cuteness is quietly dignified. Her looks are so striking that he can't help feeling something for his fiancée. Sally broke into his thoughts and asked if he was always up that early. He agreed and said he always comes to that place to train first thing in the morning, but today she beat him. This is his first time there. Events that raise favor with different characters appear from time to time in the Academy section of the game. Knowing about the morning events, he made a point of waking up early to attend. Seli admits she woke up early expecting to get some exercise. Waking up early was worth it if she could meet him like that. Her words hit Alex like a lightning strike to the heart. He immediately told himself he already loved her while his body trembled. Confused, the future queen called his name. He froze, then remembered the dialogue choices and that training together was the correct answer, so he got nervous and began to stutter. Uncertain how to respond, he realized training together would force him to face Seli. They would lock eyes while swinging swords, and he did not want that because he was sure he would be nervous and embarrassed, but he told her he would start training and that they should begin. He's a real idiot. In front of his fiancée, he becomes flustered and can't act like a prince because Seli is simply too cute to handle. Knowing the events were random, he expected more chances and just needed to stay calmer as he adjusted, because choosing correctly next time could make up for that setback. This time he was determined to do the right thing. Seeing they were both there, Seli figured they could practice sword fighting together. Seli worried she might have done something to upset Alex. Upset that she could not tell what he was thinking, she found their conversations never got going and often cut off halfway, so she told herself to be more careful. And although she could talk to Ray normally, she immediately dismissed that thought as rude to compare him to Lord Alex, and in the end she blamed herself for how she had approached him. Over tea, she told Ray about those events, as he had promised earlier. Ray could not believe it. She kept training even with Lord Alex there. Sally agrees, saying she woke up early to practice with her sword. He happened to be there first but ran off. Alex then starts to train by himself without a word. Sally asked Ray whether it made things awkward when she finished her practice early and returned. Ray understands her. He remembered seeing him practice his sword in the courtyard that day and said Alex was a hard worker who spent the morning training. The future queen agrees with him because Alex always puts in that kind of effort, and she deeply respects him for it. He's always so distant they can't keep a conversation going. She'd hoped they'd train together this morning, but it didn't happen. Worried she'd upset Alex, she was surprised when Ray suggested Alex might just be a serious person. Lord Alex, the first prince, bears the heavy weight of everyone's expectations and responsibilities, while Siegfried, the second prince in their class, is the opposite, saying he has no intention of inheriting the throne and therefore has zero motivation. He wished Siegfried had some of Lord Alex's seriousness, which made Seli laugh. Realizing Rai might be right, she thinks Alex is probably too serious and hopes he will loosen up a little. And speaking of Siegfried, Rai says the second prince turned down the student council offer because joining would have him compared to the first prince, so Rai asks whether Seli has already decided to join the student council. She agreed with him and said Lord Alex is set to be student council president, so she'll take part, because if she, as his fiancée, didn't join, people would start rumors that they were not on good terms. Ray asked how many members are on the student council. Sally asked Ray to take a little interest in the student council. She explained it had 5 members and 1 assistant and said spots were still open, so she could recommend him if he was interested, but Ray declined quickly because all he could see was a future full of trouble. He looked surprised when Seli said she would ask Lady Yuri from their class. The future queen noticed his expression when Seli mentioned the saint. She asked if he knew her. Ray did not say he knew Yuri and instead said she was famous, which explained why he knew her name. Certain they'd learn he knew Yuri, he expected her to grill him for details, so he asked whether there were other candidates and then spat out his tea when Seli mentioned Melt besides Lady Erica. He can't imagine Melt fitting into the student council. It's impossible because the council must keep her out and she should stay away from them. He suggests Lord Flaga, a man who prizes authority and status. Sally thinks of the name and realizes he is the second son of the Lansdowne family. His family background is impeccable, but she wonders about his ability. She still wanted the last member to be a woman because she was the only woman among the officers, and Ray assumed he wasn't on her list because he was a man, but Sally told him he was an exception. Ray said he would never join the student council. Lord Flago headed to the student council office, dropping quickly to his knees before Prince Alex. Prince Alex remembers him as the second son of the Lansdowne house. Alex realizes this isn't a simple greeting and asks what Flaga wants. Flaga says he has come about a delicate matter. The House of Lansdowne has filled the student council officer roles at the Royal Academy for generations, and he hopes to follow that tradition by joining the council himself. Flaga thought that by tradition, the highest-ranking member of the upper nobility becomes student council president and picks the other members, so the first Prince Alex holds the presidency and the appointment power, and Flaga clenched his teeth because if he'd made Class A, he wouldn't have to come here and grovel like this. Alex understood him, but there were many more candidates this year than just the 3 of them, including his younger brother Siegfried, his fiancée Seli, the saintess Yuri Anastasia, and Eric's adopted sister Erica. Flaga was surprised when Alex said they'd be too many if he joined. They were also considering the great archmage's disciple, a girl named Melta, and he asks Flaga if they have any reason to choose him over her. Flaga says Siegfried seems uninterested, that Lady Erica and Yuri are adopted daughters, and that Lady Melta, though possibly the great archmage's disciple, is only a commoner, so Flaga was sure none of them would even be considered candidates. Alex said he might be right about Siegfried. Because Siegfried's mother is a lady-in-waiting, he has kept a low profile and likely does not want to get involved with the student council. Alex treated others as if they were on the same level as Flaga, and that enraged Flaga because it put him on the same level as a commoner. Alex said the academy is a meritocracy, so even a commoner can be elected to the student council if they have the right skills, and he had heard that Melty's power as a mage disciple was S-rank. To prove his abilities were better than hers. Speechless, Flaga remembered when Melt unleashed such massive power. He can surpass her with a sword, but perhaps not in magic. Gritting his teeth, he assumed he could not join the student council, but his face suddenly changed, and he felt hope when Alex said he would at least make him a candidate. Before deciding whether he can get in, he needs others' opinions, so Alex asks Eric what he thinks. Eric says he was reluctant but agreed. Flaga's family name is more than enough, but Flaga still lacks a deciding factor, as Alex said. All their members are currently from Class A, he added. Lady Seli is among them. He believes forming the council with Class A students is standard practice. Alex agreed communication would be easier if they kept it to Class A, so he turned to Aries and asked his opinion, and Aries said Alex was the president, Eric was the vice president, Lady Seli would be the treasurer, and Eric would likely handle the general affairs since he is better suited to physical work than thinking. Only the secretary position remains, and since the other year's secretaries are women, he thinks a woman would keep the balance. Flago was irritated with Aries, viewing him as nothing but a womanizer. Sweating and staring at the 3, he cursed that no one would let him join and wondered why they stood in his way, and refused to respect him despite his status as a marquis and member of the prestigious House of Lansdowne. Alex saw his 2 companions' support and said he couldn't refuse him a chance. He asked whether he knew that the freshman welcome party would happen soon. Student council members are traditionally announced there. He told him he could only join the freshman welcome party if Flaga brought one of 3 people as his partner, Yuri Anastasia, Erica Milford, or Melt Suzeraine. The 3 women he mentioned were also candidates for the student council. Even if he becomes a member, they still want to have a connection with them, Before the party, he needs to get one of the girls to agree to be his partner and escort her to the venue. Alex promises to let him be a student council member if Flaga can do that. Alex asks him if he can do it. Flaga gave a positive response. After thanking the first prince for his consideration and promising to make sure he would seize that opportunity, he left the three. After Flaga left, Eric immediately asked Alex if he was sure about the condition and added that he respects Flaga's reputation, but personally sees little benefit in bringing him into their ranks. Alex agrees with him because it is clearly true, and Eric asks him why. He says they've only given him a chance, even if the chance of success is extremely small, and whether he takes it is up to Flaga. He said Eric will surely be Eric's partner. Eric agreed, since he had no intention of giving his sister to Flaga. That eliminated one candidate. Siegfried plans to ask Melta to be his partner. Ares cut in, assuming the only remaining candidate was Yuri Anastasia. Alex confirmed he was right and said the saint was getting a lot of attention. Apparently, a behind-the-scenes fight to secure her as a partner has already started, and it will likely be fierce. It is not impossible, but his chances look slim. Alex grew worried that Flaga was late to the game and assumed Flaga would panic and use forceful methods to ask Yuri out. He will be the one to save her from that predicament. The plan to achieve two goals at once will boost his standing with the saint and also bring Yuri into the student council. Apologizing in advance to Flaga, he admitted to using him as a stepping stone. Unaware of his own laughter, he left Ares and Eric confused. Eric liked the tactic because it lets them reject Flaga politely by giving him a chance so he does not lose face. If Flaga uses despicable methods to secure a partner, they can cite that as grounds to exclude him. Exactly as expected from their lord, Alex. As Flaga approached his subordinate, he planned to go after Yuri, who was adopted into Anastasia's house but raised in a lowly orphanage. Even if she was called the saintess, she would not refuse an invitation from him, a marquis, and his dogs asked about the student council. He replied that it was practically decided. He was excited about the freshman welcome party. Ray went to the cafeteria to get something to eat. As he eats, he can't stop praising the exquisite, delicious food. It also has generous portions and a diverse menu. Knowing most students who eat there are commoners makes him more at ease. High-ranking nobles have their own restaurant attached to the main building, so they rarely use the separate cafeteria. Ray was thrilled because the lunch lady liked him and kept giving him a huge portion he couldn't finish. Two students talking about the freshman welcome party drew his attention. A decision probably needed to be made soon, even so. Siegfried didn't expect Melta to agree to be his partner so quickly. Bribed with a snack, she immediately accepted. Siegfried chose someone whose background would not provoke the first prince's faction or cause drama. Ray pictured Melta and Siegfried as a good-looking couple when they stood together. That only works if they stay quiet, and you already know how Melta tends to behave. Ray got a few invitations, but Dinah said none of those candidates suited him. Sylphie picks one person who can play with him, and he really didn't know who to pick. They chose Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Moe. Ray heard a commotion. A voice asked someone to stop. As flogged subordinates, they seemed to insist someone accept something and argued that refusing the Lord is rude, so the person should accept it. Ray steps toward the crowd and hears a student say Flaga was bothering someone. The girl, who appeared to be Yuri Anastasia, yelled at Flaga's group that she had already said no because she did not know them and had no intention of being a complete stranger's partner. Flaga lost his temper and said he'd been polite and asked her nicely, but she still turned him down. Angry and desperate, Flaga grabbed Yuri's hand, told her to be quiet, and demanded she accept him as her partner, but when she saw Ray in the crowd, she broke free at once. Rushing to Ray, she grabbed his clothes and told Flaga he had already promised to go to the party with Ray, so she could not accept his invitation. Ray froze at Yuri's words, and Flaga was furious. Shouting at Ray, he asked if Yuri was really his partner. Ray answered calmly that it was how it turned out. Flaga wasn't finished and asked again why he was there. Ray seems confused by the question. Still, he says the place was the cafeteria, and he was there to eat. Flaga was enraged by his answer because it did not reflect what he meant, and his question is why he inserted himself into their conversation. Ray looks confused and turns to Yuri, whose eyes are full of tears. He told Flaga he was probably there because they were being annoying. Then he told Flaga that they had been loud the whole time, so he reminded them they were in the cafeteria and were bothering everyone trying to eat. He said they surrounded a girl with a large group of men. From the outside, they just looked like thugs harassing a helpless girl. Again, Flaga lost his temper when Ray called him a punk because he was born a noble, and the crowd sided with Ray and began to insult him. saying the word punk suited him. People shouted since it was clear Yuri had already said no to him, but Flaga kept pressuring her. Others said people would not obey nobles just because of their status, and he heard someone call him an idiot. He demanded to know who had done it because he planned to kill them, but the crowd was unfazed and kept insulting him, saying Flaga always bragged and relied on his family name. They shout that he can't do anything on his own and call him a stupid, worthless noble. Someone even threw something that hit him on the head. Unable to hold back his anger, Flaga unleashed his power. When the crowd saw it, they ran because the scene turned dangerous. Yuri grew worried and asked Ray what to do as the situation became serious. Ray thought of Sylphie, and the young spirit spoke louder because he was about to act. He clapped his hands, and the loud noise seemed to freeze the crowd. The crowd and Flaga look clueless, and Ray apologizes for the loud noise. He asks Flaga to take a moment to sort things out. He says Flaga asked Yuri to be his partner for the freshman welcome party. After Flaga agrees, he adds that Yuri declined the invitation. Yuri agrees with him. He decided not to make a scene in front of everyone. Flaga blamed Yuri for not accepting his invitation, and Ray said accepting the party invitation was each person's choice. Fluggy smirked and told him he was wrong. He insisted those of lower rank must obey those above them, so there is no personal choice. As usual, his idiotic subordinate seems proud of his nonsense. Meanwhile, both could only say wow. Ray told Flaga, using his reasoning, that Yuri is a count's daughter and a saint. That means she is not of lower status, and Flaga agreed because Yuri is the saint who supposedly receives a divine revelation and can use holy magic. Still, he looks down on her because she came from a humble orphan background. He also said he didn't know how Yuri wormed her way into a count's family, that adopting someone of an unknown bloodline was unwise, and he insulted Yuri's father for having no eye for people. Yuri flew into a rage and grew emotional when Ray spoke badly about her foster father. He put his hand on her shoulder, and she calmed down. He seriously asked to flog a new academy that values ability above all else. Whether the Marquis or Yuri is an orphan, there is no reason anyone should obey him, at least within the academy. Flaga gritted his teeth in frustration and asked Ray whether he was trying to pick a fight with him. Ray smiles and asks him what he would do if he wanted to fight Ray. Right then, he remained Yuri's partner and had no intention of giving up that role. If Flaga wants Yuri, he can face Ray with his strength. This was meant as a mock battle. Flaga can file a request if he can fight. He changed his mind and submitted the request himself. Flaga will set the date, time, place, and battle format. He urged him to defeat or overpower him. That would end his partnership with Yuri, and Flaga might get his chance. Turning to Yuri, he winked. Yuri still has to decide whether to accept Flaga as a partner. Flaga accepts the challenge and will crush Ray's weak magic with his full strength. Students rushed to the viewing area to watch a practice match. Walking down the hallway, Siegfried heard two students talking about it. He sighed and looked to see who wanted the duel for sport. After hearing the duel was between Flaga Lansdowne of Class D and Ray. He nearly threw up his breakfast. Confused, he knew Ray avoided drawing attention and wondered if Ray had done something that had angered Flaga. Maybe Flaga did something to make Ray angry. Suddenly, Melta appeared, upset that Ray was going to a practice match. At the same time, she wondered whether he would use his magic while she was away. Wanting to see the match and hoping for a fight with Ray, she cursed Flaga for keeping all of Ray's magic to himself, told Siegfried they should go, and rushed there immediately. Meanwhile, students begin to fill the area. Ray sees the crowd has gathered. Scanning the area, he saw Siegfried and Melta, and the second prince waved at him. While Melty looked angry at him, Yuri then called him by name. She apologizes for the duel she caused, and Ray comforts her, saying it's not something she needs to worry about. It didn't look like it, but he was furious at Flaga. Seeing Flaga insult an important friend right in front of him, he can't stay silent. Yuri freezes when she hears the word important and Ray notices, so he asks if something is wrong. She says it's nothing and that she's just worried, then asks Ray not to hurt himself. The second man winked at her and said he would not lose to Flaga. If needed, after leaving Flaga beaten up, he'll force him to kneel before Yuri, but she refuses immediately because it's unnecessary. Staring at her, Ray wanted to show he was calm and composed. Relieved, he laughed because Yuri supports him, so he must do his best. Later, Miriam announces the practice match will begin and says the challenger, designated Flaga Lansdowne, will fight once with magic allowed. She looks at Ray, the designated one, and he asks if the combat mode suits him, when Ray agrees. The announcer begins to read the rules. A fighter wins by making their opponent faint or surrender. Strikes to vital points are banned, but they have many healing mages, so broken arms or bleeding are not a concern. She then asks Flaga and Ray if they are ready. As they stared at each other, she told them to start. The two drew their sword and took a stance. Flaga asks whether his stance is his own idea. He boasted that his swordsmanship had been taught directly by the Imperial Guard. The dogs cheered for their master, and Ray simply agreed, saying sword stances are important. He immediately jumps to Flaga, strikes him with his sword, and makes clear that no matter how impressive a stance is, it is pointless if he does not know how to use it properly. Flaga cursed at Ray and shoved his sword so forcefully that Ray stepped back to avoid it. Siegfried said the move won't work and isn't practical for real combat, but Ray is handling it as he pleases. He said he could already tell how the fight would end, and Melta agreed that their match was boring. Angry, she shouted that swords were boring because she had hoped to see Ray's magic. Siegfried said nothing and wondered what Flaga had done to anger Ray. He knows Ray calmly dodges everything thrown his way, and though he was sure it had something to do with the saint, he doesn't care as long as they're entertaining. Sylphie told Ray to go for it because Flaga is a villain who bothers Yuri, and the young spirit urges Ray to take him down. Ray agrees with him because that's his intention. Ray immediately dashed at Flaga and slashed with his sword, but Flaga barely blocked it. Ray told him that the repeated acts of disrespect toward Yuri and the insult to Anastasia's adoptive father hurt Yuri. He put his strength into the sword and swung it. He told the arrogant monkey he did not intend to forgive him. Ray steps up to him and asks if that's all he's got. Ray urged Flaga to use his proud fire magic because it was a magical fight. He did not want people saying Flaga lost just because he didn't use magic, letting them say that would be a problem. Flaga gritted his teeth in anger and took his sword from his subordinate. Smirking, he said he would show him his power. Fiery sword, red snake. He boasted that the Landstone family had passed down this fire magic for generations and asks if it is frightening, and tells Ray he can reduce him to ashes with this. Siegfried wondered about the magic wrapped around the weapon and thought he had just stolen the technique from Ray. Melta says imitation isn't bad by itself. What matters is adapting it to your own style and making it yours. At one time she tended to copy Suzerain's method. Siegfried was speechless and sometimes found Melta's remarks sensible. Melta adds that Flaga's sense for naming things is terrible, so it's a drawback. Back at the arena, Flaga shows Ray how fabulous his red snake is. He asks whether it's much more terrifying than his stupid wind magic and says it's too late to regret letting him use it. Sylphie was furious, but Ray stayed calm. Flaga ordered his red snake to coil around Ray and burn him to death. Flames slowly closed in around him, which worried Yuri. By the time the fire consumed him, students said it was too dangerous. Flaga laughed triumphantly and ordered his red snake to kill Ray and burn him to ashes. Ray channels his wind magic. One slash puts out the fire. I saw him unharmed. Flaga stood stunned, unable to understand why the flames had not burned Ray. That's because he blew it away. Flaga, in a burst of anger, kept launching attacks. It never reached Ray because Sylphie was blowing everything away. Now it's Ray's turn to attack. Charging forward, he delivers several slashes at the ugly monkey. At first nothing seemed to happen, but his clothes soon fell to tatters and he looked like a beggar. Guys, throw this arrogant monkey a coin. Holding his sword to the man's face, Ray asked if he still wanted to continue. The man gritted his teeth. But kneeling before Ray, he surrendered. That settled it. Yuri couldn't hide her excitement, and Siegfried watched with amusement. Meanwhile, Flaga's subordinates were worried about him. Miriam announced Ray Cruiser as the winner, and Sylphie and Dine were happy while the crowd celebrated. Ray watched the dogs help their owner. Siegfried came over and said he always expected to win, but Ray was sure he was only watching for fun. Siegfried couldn't stop laughing at Flaga's face a moment ago, so he asks Ray if that's what it looks like when someone breaks their spirit. Someone called Ray's name, and when he turned to see who it was, Ray felt his bones nearly break when Melta suddenly bumped her head against him. He asked Melta whether she was cheering for him too and was about to thank her. Melta cut him off and demanded a fight. Ray looks confused. Melta didn't give him a chance to speak and said she wanted a practice match with him. She finds it fun because she can cast many spells. Ray says the challenged person can decline practice matches because otherwise anyone could impose unfair conditions. He turned down the practice match with Melt, but Melt refused to accept that. He believes that after you play a practice match, you cannot challenge or accept another for 3 months. Yuri suddenly approached him and began to cry. Worried, he looked at his two friends before reminding her. Yuri told himself it would be fine because he wouldn't lose to someone like Flaga, and he figured she was just scared. Ray suddenly kneels, surprising herself, and requests permission to join him and take part in the upcoming student welcome party. Blushing, Yuri held her face and said it was really unfair. Furious, Melta accused Ray of being evil for making Yuri cry. Siegfried immediately defended Ray, saying it was not true. Ray hesitated to go to the party because he couldn't find a partner. Yuri felt sorry for him and offered to be his partner. Yuri understood the situation and gladly agreed to be his partner. Ray had forgot to make Flaga kneel and apologize, so he offered to bring Flaga now and force him to do it. Siegfried couldn't help asking if he was a demon. Meanwhile, Alex thinks it's about time for Flaga to start moving. Outside, he heard two students saying the battle was amazing. Chapters end at 12. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you love this manga. Have a good day.